The ancient forest lay cloaked in shadow, its gnarled trees twisted and warped by time. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. In the heart of this forsaken place stood a figure, tall and gaunt, his features barely visible in the twilight. Elias had wandered these woods for what felt like days, his body aching and weary, his mind clouded with doubt and fear. But he pressed on, determined to find the source of the mysterious power that had drawn him here. Elias had always been drawn to the supernatural, to the strange and unexplained. As a young boy, he had spent hours poring over books of ancient lore, tales of creatures that lurked in the dark and powers that defied reason. But none of the stories had prepared him for this. None had warned him of the Serpent Queen. It was an old tale, passed down through generations of his family, whispered around campfires, and told in hushed tones in the dead of night. A tale of a queen, beautiful and cruel, who ruled over a hidden realm deep within the forest. She was said to possess the power to grant wishes, to grant anything one could desire, but at a terrible cost. The price was always steep, one's soul, one's life, or perhaps something even worse. Elias had never taken the stories seriously, thinking them to be mere fairy tales. But now, as he stood on the edge of the clearing, he could feel the weight of her presence, a force so palpable it made his skin crawl. It was real. She was real. The queen's voice broke the silence, soft and smooth as silk, carrying on the wind. "You've come, Elias," she said, her words laced with an eerie sweetness. "I've been waiting for you." He turned, his heart racing as he faced her. She stood in the center of the clearing, a tall figure cloaked in shadows, her eyes glowing like twin emerald flames. Her long dark hair cascaded down her back, shimmering as though it were made of liquid night. She wore a crown of serpents, their jeweled eyes glinting with malice. She was beautiful, but it was a beauty that sent chills down his spine. There was something otherworldly about her, something that made her seem more like a force of nature than a person. Elias took a step back, his instincts screaming at him to run, but his feet remained rooted to the spot. He couldn't tear his gaze away from her. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice shaking despite his best efforts to remain calm. The queen's smile widened, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "I am the Serpent Queen, ruler of this forest, mistress of the dark forces that dwell within it. And you, Elias, are here because you have something I want." Elias's heart skipped a beat. "What do you want from me?" The queen's gaze flicked to him, her eyes glowing with an unsettling intensity. "You seek power, do you not? You seek to change your fate, to escape the grasp of those who have held you captive your entire life." Elias flinched at her words, for they rang too true. He had always felt trapped, confined by the expectations of his family, by the limitations of his own circumstances. But he had never imagined that those feelings would lead him here, to this moment, standing before the Serpent Queen. Elias began, but his words faltered in his throat. There was something about her presence, something in the air that made it hard to think clearly, to speak at all. The queen stepped forward, her movements fluid and graceful, like a serpent gliding through water. She reached out and gently lifted his chin with a single finger, forcing him to meet her gaze. "I can give you everything you desire, Elias," she whispered, her voice dripping with temptation. "Power, wealth, freedom. All of it can be yours, if you are willing to pay the price." Elias's pulse quickened, his breath coming in short gasps. He had heard the stories, had heard the warnings of those who had made the queen's bargain before him. They had paid dearly for their wishes, their souls consumed by the darkness she commanded. But even knowing the price, a part of him longed for what she offered. The temptation was too strong. Elias hesitated, his mind racing. "What is the price?" The queen's smile deepened, her eyes glittering with malicious delight. "The price is always the same," she said softly. "A part of yourself, a part of your soul. You will give me something, and in return, I will grant your greatest desire." Elias felt a cold shiver run down his spine, a part of his soul. It sounded like madness, a price too high to pay. But the queen's gaze never wavered, her hypnotic presence drawing him in, urging him to take the leap. "You can walk away, Elias," she said, her voice a soothing murmur. "You can return to the life you've always known, the life of mediocrity, of unfulfilled dreams, or you can accept my offer, and I will give you everything." Elias swallowed hard, his mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. What could he possibly offer in exchange for the power the queen promised? What was worth trading for everything he had ever wanted? And then, in that moment, the queen's words sank into his heart, the temptation consuming him. The choice was his. The price, however steep, was nothing compared to what she offered. "I accept," Elias whispered, his voice barely audible. The queen's smile widened, and she stepped back, her eyes glowing brighter as her power surged. "Wise choice, Elias. Your bargain is sealed." With a snap of her fingers, Elias felt a sharp pain in his chest, as though something deep within him had been torn away. He gasped, his knees buckling beneath him, but the queen caught him effortlessly, her touch icy and unyielding. "You are mine now," she whispered in his ear, her breath cold against his skin, "and I will hold you to this bargain forever." As the queen's laughter echoed through the clearing, Elias felt the weight of his decision settle over him. There was no turning back now. He had made his choice, and the price would be paid. Elias could feel the Serpent Queen's power coursing through him, a strange sensation that was both foreign and familiar. His limbs felt heavy, as if each movement were weighed down by an invisible force. But it wasn't just physical, it was deeper, more profound. Her magic had seeped into the very core of his being, becoming a part of him, a part of his soul. As he stood there, barely able to catch his breath, the queen regarded him with an expression that seemed to hold both triumph and pity. Her eyes gleamed with the knowledge of something he could not yet comprehend. "You've made the right choice," she said, her voice smooth like silk, but with an edge of danger lurking just beneath. "The path you walk now is one of power. You will see the world with new eyes, Elias. You will never be the same again." He looked down at his hands, feeling the tingling sensation of her magic still running through his veins. Was this the gift she had promised? Power, wealth, freedom, or was it a curse wrapped in the guise of a blessing? "You'll learn soon enough," the queen continued, her tone soft but filled with an unsettling promise. "But first, I will give you something more, a final gift, something that will make you understand the price you've paid." Before Elias could react, the air around him shifted, becoming thicker and colder. The queen extended one long, slender hand toward him, her fingers glowing with a strange, emerald light. The light intensified, swirling around him like a whirlpool of energy, pulling at his mind, his senses, his very essence. Elias closed his eyes, the sensation overwhelming, and for a moment he thought he might lose himself entirely. The queen's magic pressed down on him from all sides, as if it were wrapping around him, holding him in place, drawing out everything that made him who he was. And yet, just as suddenly as it began, the pressure released, and Elias gasped for air, his chest heaving. When he opened his eyes again, the world around him had changed. The forest had vanished, replaced by a vast, dark expanse. The sky above was an endless void of swirling black clouds, lit only by flashes of lightning. The ground beneath him was cracked and scorched, as if some great force had torn the earth apart. Elias's breath caught in his throat as he realized where he was. "Welcome to my domain," the Serpent Queen's voice echoed in the distance, reverberating through the empty space. "This is the place where your soul now resides. This is the price of your bargain." Elias tried to speak, but no words came. His throat felt dry, as though it had been drained of every drop of moisture. He staggered forward, his eyes scanning the desolate landscape. There was nothing here, no signs of life, no warmth, no light. Only the cold emptiness of the queen's power. Suddenly, shapes began to emerge from the shadows, their forms indistinct and ghostly. Elias's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that they were souls, souls just like his own, souls that had made the same bargain he had, trading their lives for a taste of the queen's power. But unlike him, these souls were trapped, their bodies twisted and broken, forever bound to the queen's realm. They reached out to him, their hands grasping at the air, their faces contorted in eternal suffering. The forest had vanished, replaced by a vast, dark expanse. The sky above was an endless void of swirling black clouds, lit only by flashes of lightning. The ground beneath him was cracked and scorched, as if some great force had torn the earth apart. Elias's breath caught in his throat as he realized where he was. "Welcome to my domain," the Serpent Queen's voice echoed in the distance, reverberating through the empty space. "This is the place where your soul now resides. This is the price of your bargain." Elias tried to speak, but no words came. His throat felt dry, as though it had been drained of every drop of moisture. He staggered forward, his eyes scanning the desolate landscape. There was nothing here, no signs of life, no warmth, no light. Only the cold emptiness of the queen's power. Suddenly, shapes began to emerge from the shadows, their forms indistinct and ghostly. Elias's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that they were souls, souls just like his own, souls that had made the same bargain he had, trading their lives for a taste of the queen's power. But unlike him, these souls were trapped, their bodies twisted and broken, forever bound to the queen's realm. They reached out to him, their hands grasping at the air, their faces contorted in eternal suffering. "They are the price," the queen's voice whispered in his ear. "The souls of those who thought they could outwit me, those who sought power but failed to realize the cost. They belong to me now, and so will you." Elias's breath caught in his throat as he looked at the souls, his heart heavy with the weight of his own fate. He could feel their anguish, their despair, and he realized with a sickening clarity that this was his future. This was what awaited him. "No," Elias whispered, his voice trembling. "I didn't know. I didn't understand." The queen's laughter rang out, low and menacing. "You still don't understand, do you? The power I gave you is nothing but a shadow. It is an illusion, a fleeting moment of satisfaction. The true cost of your bargain is your soul, Elias. And now you are bound to me forever." The queen stepped forward, her form shifting with the grace of a serpent, her eyes glowing like twin orbs of fire. She raised one hand, and a tendril of dark magic snaked toward Elias, coiling around his wrist like a serpent's embrace. The magic burned with an icy fire, and Elias cried out in pain as it seared into his flesh. "This is your last gift, Elias," the queen said, her voice filled with dark amusement. "This is the gift of eternal servitude. You are mine now, and you will remain mine for all eternity." Elias tried to pull away, but the magic held him fast. He could feel his strength draining, his will crumbling under the weight of her power. The queen's magic was inescapable. It was everywhere, in the very air he breathed, in the blood that ran through his veins. "You will serve me, Elias," the queen continued, her voice soft yet commanding. "And when you have nothing left to give, when you are no longer of use to me, I will take your soul, just as I have taken the others." The tendrils of magic tightened around Elias, and he felt himself being pulled toward the queen, unable to resist. The souls that had once been human reached out to him, their hands grasping at his arms, pulling him into the darkness that surrounded them. Elias wanted to scream, but the words caught in his throat. He could feel the weight of the queen's bargain sinking deeper into his soul, an inescapable burden that would haunt him for the rest of his existence. "You are mine," the queen repeated, her voice laced with dark satisfaction. "And there is no escape." As the last remnants of his will faded, Elias understood. The power the queen had promised him was nothing more than a trap, and now he was her prisoner, her servant, her plaything, forever bound by the serpent's last gift. Elias's body was no longer his own. The Serpent Queen's power consumed him, creeping into every part of him, twisting his thoughts, bending his will. He could feel the sting of the dark magic that flowed through his veins, and it was all-consuming, as if the essence of the very air around him had turned to venom. His mind, once clear and free, was clouded with the Queen's influence, each passing moment blurring the lines between who he was and what he was becoming. He stumbled through the shadowed expanse, the land that had once been the Queen's domain now shifting, transforming into something more malevolent, more dangerous. The very ground seemed to pulse beneath his feet, alive with a dark energy that seemed to ripple outward with each step he took. His breath came in short, shallow gasps, his heart racing in his chest as the weight of his curse began to settle over him. The souls that surrounded him, twisted, writhing forms, were the remnants of those who had made the same bargain, and yet each one of them seemed to look at him with hollow eyes, pleading for something that could never be. Their voices echoed in his ears, whispers of agony, of despair. They too had been lured by the Serpent Queen's promises, only to be bound to her forever, enslaved by the power they had once craved. Elias tried to ignore them, tried to focus on something, anything, other than the suffocating despair that threatened to drown him. But the Serpent Queen's presence was inescapable. He could feel her watching him, her cold, malevolent gaze always upon him, even though she was nowhere to be seen. "You are mine," the Queen's voice whispered in his ear, low and menacing, like the hiss of a snake preparing to strike. "Forever bound to me, forever a part of my wrath." The words stung, and Elias's chest tightened as he felt her power tighten its grip around him. He had made the choice. He had given up everything, his soul, his very being, for the promise of power. And now, there was no escape. The Queen was everywhere, inside him, around him, in the very fabric of the world he now inhabited. Her wrath, her fury, was like a storm that raged through his thoughts, a constant, suffocating presence that made him feel as if he were drowning in her malice. His thoughts became erratic, as if the power she had granted him had broken something deep within. His own desires twisted and turned against him, his former ambitions morphing into something darker. The visions that plagued him, of power, of wealth, of freedom, now felt like cruel taunts. He had traded everything for this, and in the end, it was never enough. The Queen's wrath had already begun to take root within him. His body, though not his own, was now a vessel for her desires, her whims. The magic that flowed through him was not his to control. It was hers. It burned like fire, but it was ice at the same time, numbing him even as it consumed him. Elias could feel the weight of her anger, her disappointment, crushing him. He was no longer Elias, the man who had walked into the forest seeking power. He had become something else, something monstrous. His reflection, if he dared to look, would show a stranger, a creature born of magic and torment, but with a soul long lost to darkness. As he wandered through the desolation, he stumbled upon a sight that stopped him in his tracks. The ground was littered with remnants of past bargains, pieces of broken dreams, fractured souls that had once been human, but were now twisted into something else entirely. They were the same as the souls he had seen before, lost, broken, trapped. But this time, something was different. A figure stood in the center of the wreckage, cloaked in shadows. Elias's heart skipped a beat as he realized it was the Queen, but not as he had seen her before. She was larger now, more monstrous, her form coiled like a serpent, her eyes glowing with an unholy light. Her crown of serpents was more pronounced, the creatures writhing around her head as though alive, their scales glistening with a dark sheen. She moved toward him, her gaze cold and piercing, and Elias felt the air grow heavier with each step she took. There was no warmth, no kindness in her presence, only cold, relentless power. "You disappoint me, Elias," she hissed, her voice laced with venom. "You were supposed to be my chosen. You were supposed to serve me, but instead you have become a tool for my wrath." Elias's heart pounded in his chest. What do you want from me now?" he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. The queen's laugh was cruel, echoing through the empty void. "I want you to feel it," she said softly. "I want you to understand the full extent of the wrath you have invoked. You are no longer the man you were. You are nothing but an instrument of destruction, a slave to my power." Her words struck him like a physical blow, and Elias staggered backward, his body trembling. The queen's magic was now fully infused in him, and he could feel it like a second skin. His every thought, every action was her will. He was no longer capable of making choices, of having desires of his own. He was the queen's servant, a puppet bound to her strings. "You will do as I command," the queen continued, her voice dripping with malice. "You will carry out my will and unleash my wrath upon the world. There is no escape for you now, Elias. You are mine." And with that, the queen raised her hand, summoning a wave of dark magic that surged toward Elias like a tidal wave. He tried to resist, tried to fight it, but there was no resisting her power. It was all-consuming, overwhelming. His body began to contort, his mind shattering under the weight of the magic. He could feel himself slipping away, his identity disintegrating as the queen's wrath engulfed him. "You belong to me," the queen whispered one last time, her voice a haunting echo in the void, "and you will serve me forever." As Elias fell to his knees, his body racked with pain, he realized that he had lost everything. The Serpent Queen's wrath had claimed him completely. There was no escape, no salvation. His soul was gone, consumed by the darkness that now ruled him. He was her servant, her instrument of destruction, and he would carry out her will until the end of time. Time no longer held meaning within the realm of the Serpent Queen. Elias could feel the passage of it, like the endless stretch of a dark and unnerving river. But no matter how much time passed, the torment he faced seemed to have no end. Days merged into nights, or perhaps they never truly existed. Here, in this forsaken place, time was as twisted as everything else. The queen's realm had become Elias's prison, a dark expanse of desolate land where nothing grew, no life flourished, and the only sound was the eerie whisper of wind through the broken remnants of the souls bound to her. In this place the air was thick with the weight of despair, an endless choking fog that weighed on him like a tangible force, and through it all the queen's presence loomed, omnipresent, eternal, cold. "You are mine!" Her voice echoed through his mind constantly, like the slithering hiss of a serpent, always reminding him of his eternal servitude. "Forevermore." Her words were as sharp as daggers, driving deep into his heart. He was nothing now, nothing but a tool, a slave to the queen's whims. No longer Elias, no longer a man with desires and dreams. He was merely an extension of her wrath, her vengeance, her will. There was nothing left of the man who had walked into the forest seeking power. He was lost to the void. Yet, even in his despair, there was something inside him, a flicker of resistance, a faint ember that refused to be completely extinguished. It was a fragile thing, so delicate, so fleeting, but it remained, a fragment of the man he had once been. But the queen knew that the flicker of defiance within him was dangerous. She could feel it. She had long since realized that her hold on him wasn't perfect, that there were still pieces of Elias that resisted, that fought back against her grip. She would not allow that. The queen's gaze bore into him as she appeared before him once again, her serpentine form coiling in the darkness. She was a vision of unearthly beauty. Yet there was something utterly repulsive about her, an aura of malevolent power that clung to her like a cloud of poison. Her eyes gleamed like twin orbs of fire, filled with cruel satisfaction. "You dare resist me?" Her voice was smooth, but it carried an undercurrent of pure malice. "You are mine, Elias. You cannot escape what you are." Her words were like chains, wrapping around his soul, tightening their grip. His body trembled, not from the cold, but from the sheer force of her presence. He was nothing to her now, just another soul bound to her will, but still, that small ember of resistance flared within him, burning with painful clarity. "I refuse," Elias managed to say, his voice hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "I won't be your slave." The queen's laughter rang out, hollow and mocking. "You have no choice. I have already claimed you, Elias. Your soul belongs to me. You are bound to my will, and I will never release you, forevermore." She extended a slender hand, her fingers curling as if to grasp him, and Elias felt an overwhelming pressure on his chest, as if something cold and suffocating were crushing him. He gasped for air, but it was as if the very atmosphere had turned to lead. The queen's power was suffocating, all-encompassing, and yet, in the deepest part of his mind, Elias felt the flicker of defiance again. It was weaker now, like a candle struggling against a storm, but it was there. No matter how deeply the queen had corrupted him, how thoroughly she had claimed him, Elias knew that he could not accept her will without a fight. "You are weak," the queen hissed, her voice dripping with contempt. "Your resistance is nothing. I am eternal. Your soul will burn in my service forever." Her eyes glowed brighter, her power radiating outward, pushing at him from every direction. He could feel the weight of her magic pressing against him, bending his will, twisting his thoughts. It was all-consuming, a powerful flood of darkness that sought to drown him. But the flicker of defiance didn't extinguish. It burned hotter now, like a spark in a darkened cavern, feeding on the queen's cruelty, refusing to be snuffed out. Elias's mind raced as he tried to focus on the remnants of his former self, the fragments of his humanity that had been left untouched by the queen's magic. "I won't serve you," he spat, his voice growing stronger. The queen's expression faltered for a fraction of a second, her confidence cracking, but she quickly regained her composure. "Fool," she spat. "You have no power here. You are mine, body and soul." But Elias could feel something deep within him shift, something that had been dormant for so long. The power she had given him, the power that had once been a tool of control, was now something else, something darker. He had no idea what it was or how it worked, but he knew one thing for certain. He had been changed, and in that change he had gained something she had not accounted for. Her power might have claimed his body, his mind, his soul, but she had not fully claimed his will. And now that was the one thing he had left to fight with. With a cry of defiance, Elias gathered what little strength he had left and broke free from the queen's magical grip, stumbling backward as the force of her power crashed against him like a tidal wave. The queen's eyes widened in shock, and for the first time since Elias had met her, there was something approaching fear in her gaze. "No," she whispered, her voice tinged with disbelief. "This is impossible." But Elias was no longer the broken man who had once wandered into her domain. He was something more now, something powerful, something she had underestimated. The flicker of resistance had become a fire, burning away the chains she had wrapped around him. And though it was still weak, still fragile, it was enough. The queen's expression twisted in fury. "You think you can escape me? You think you can defy me?" Her voice rose to a crescendo, a sharp, shrill screech that made the air vibrate with power. "You will serve me, Elias, or I will destroy everything you care about, forevermore." But Elias was not afraid, not anymore. He had nothing left to lose, and for the first time he realized that the queen's words, her promises, her power, none of it meant anything. He was not her servant, he was his own, and he would fight to the death to prove it. The air was thick with tension, crackling with the remnants of the queen's fury, but Elias stood resolute. The serpent queen's power, though vast and overwhelming, had not completely broken him. Her attempts to bind him to her will had failed, and now, in the silent, haunted remnants of the realm she had created, there was only the sound of his own breath, heavy and ragged. For a moment there was nothing but the stillness between them. Elias could feel the weight of the queen's presence, coiled like a serpent in the shadows, watching him, calculating her next move. She was patient, and cruel, but Elias knew something that she didn't. He had learned to withstand her grasp, and more importantly, he had learned something about the magic that had once controlled him. The queen could control his body, his mind, and even his soul, but there was one thing she could not control: his heart. The Serpent Queen had made the mistake of underestimating him, of assuming that her power was enough to bind him completely. She had made the bargain, but she had failed to understand that the cost of a soul was more than just a price to be paid. It was a force that could twist and turn in ways she could not predict. And Elias was about to exploit that weakness. "You cannot defeat me!" the queen hissed from the shadows, her voice dripping with venom. Her eyes glowed with an eerie light, and the ground beneath Elias's feet trembled. "You are mine, and I will claim your soul, no matter what you think you can do." Elias's heart thundered in his chest, but his resolve was unwavering. The flames of rebellion within him burned brighter now. He had been forged by the very magic that had sought to destroy him, and he had learned from it. The very thing that the queen had used to bind him was now the very thing he could use against her. "You've made a fatal mistake, Queen," Elias said, his voice steady and cold. "You thought you could control me, but you were wrong. Your magic may have bound my body, but it could never control my will." The queen laughed, a harsh, bone-chilling sound. "You think you can defy me? You think you can break free of my power?" Her laughter died, and she stepped forward, her serpentine form emerging from the shadows. "I am the queen of this realm. I am the end and the beginning. There is no escape." Elias did not flinch. He had been through too much to be intimidated by her now. "You may be powerful, but you are not invincible, and you have made the one mistake that no ruler can afford to make." The queen narrowed her eyes, her expression darkening. "And what mistake is that?" "You underestimated me," Elias said, his voice low but full of conviction. "You made the bargain with the wrong man, and now the price you pay will be your downfall." A flash of recognition flickered in the queen's eyes, but before she could react, Elias reached into the depths of his being, tapping into the very magic that had been used to bind him. He had learned the queen's magic, understood its essence, and now he was about to turn it against her. The ground trembled again, this time with a force that was not hers. Elias's hands glowed with the dark magic he had absorbed, a reflection of the power the queen had once wielded over him. The air grew thick, saturated with the smell of burning earth and sulfur. The queen's face twisted in fury as she realized what he was doing. "No!" she screamed. "You cannot! You will not!" But it was too late. Elias had already begun the final incantation, a twisted mirror of the queen's own magic. It surged around him, binding the queen in her own power, constricting like the coils of a serpent. But this time, the serpent was no longer hers. It was his. With one final, desperate scream, the queen tried to break free, but her power was no match for what Elias had become. The magic she had used to control him now turned against her, overwhelming her, stripping her of her strength. Her serpentine form writhed and contorted as the magic consumed her, her once immense power collapsing under the weight of Elias's rebellion. "No!" she cried, her voice cracking with fear. "This cannot be!" But Elias did not falter. He could feel the magic coursing through him, a wave of dark energy that threatened to tear the very fabric of the realm apart. And yet, for the first time, it felt as if he was in control. The queen had made a fatal mistake in believing that she could own him completely. She had made the bargain, but it was Elias who had learned to master its power. With a final guttural roar, the queen's form collapsed, her serpentine body breaking apart, as if it were nothing more than a collection of shadows and whispers. Her power, her very essence, was consumed by the magic she had so recklessly unleashed. The Serpent Queen had fallen, not by the hand of another, but by the very soul she had sought to control. The realm trembled, and Elias could feel the oppressive weight of the queen's presence begin to fade. The air, once thick with her malevolent energy, now felt lighter, freer. The shadows that had clung to the land began to recede, revealing the true nature of the place. The broken souls that had once been bound to the queen's will were freed, their tortured forms dissipating like smoke. For the first time since his arrival, Elias felt a sense of peace. It was not a victory he had desired, nor one he had ever truly believed possible. But in that moment, he realized something profound. The bargain had never truly been about power or control. It had been about freedom, the freedom to choose, to fight, and to reclaim his soul. As the remnants of the queen's realm faded into the distance, Elias stood alone, his heart heavy with the knowledge of the cost of his choices. The Serpent Queen's wrath had been a powerful force, but in the end, it was not enough to break him. He had stood against it, and he had won. And in the end, he understood the final truth. The bargain was never truly hers to make. It had always been his.